This is Wild Green Streams. I'm Rhett.
I'm Io.
And it's the first ever episode of the Wild Green Book Club. The Wild Green Book Club is a project where we feature a book at the start of every month, and then we, read it. This month, we're kicking off the club with the great Rosemary Mosco of Bird and Moon Comics' new book, The Birding Dictionary, a tongue-in-cheek guide for people who find themselves obsessed, against all logic and reason, with birds. Rosemary, welcome to the club.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
So happy to have you here.
This is the only book I've ever seen that opens with a hater's review of itself.
Yeah. A fake one.
The letter at the start?
Yeah, I can do that. Okay, the foreword is, in recent years, the popularity of birding has exploded. With this renewed enthusiasm has come an increase in the number of high-quality books on the subject, from field guides to natural histories to ruminations on the sociocultural impacts of birds. This book is not one of them. What you hold in your hands is a dictionary of birding terms. While the terminology is correct, the definitions are often spurious or, worse yet, silly. I sent the author several letters by certified mail expressing my concerns. After many months, I finally received a single envelope in return. It contained 3 brown feathers and a clump of common yard grass. I suspect the author may be a goose. As such, I cannot recommend this volume to any birder who, like me, lacks a sense of humor or a penchant for the absurd. For the joyless among us, I suggest you purchase my deeply researched work, Lifestyles of Left-Footed Sparrows of the Iberian Peninsula. It is available for the reasonable price of $5,890.99, shipping not included. Sincerely, Professor Hallex A. Whitewash, Hemispingus University, Patagonia, Arizona. Lots of birding in jokes in there, but hopefully amusing to folks that do not know the birding in jokes.
That is an incredible introduction to the book, and much like the definitions of the book, I think actually communicates a lot of meaning and a good description of what's coming in a way that it's kind of almost tricks you into learning.
People have been telling me, your book actually is educational. And I'm like, oh, shoot, I didn't mean to make it educational, but I think it is. I think I put a lot of facts in there.
So it's a collection of definitions. It's a dictionary, but each of the definitions has kind of a twist to it. It's kind of a different, it's basically like a meme or a joke version of each definition. What was the impetus behind making the book?
I got lucky. My publisher, Workman, who also published my book on pigeons, which is a pocket guide to pigeon watching, and also a kid's book I co-wrote for Atlas Obscura years ago, reached out because they had a collection of humorous dictionaries years and years ago. They sent me versions of, there was a gardening one and a golfing one, I think maybe a sailing one too, and they wanted to revive the series, so they wanted to start with one on birding. And they reached out and said, hey, are you at all interested in this? And I was like 1,000 times yes, this is all I ever want to do. It felt like, why am I so lucky that I get to make this? Because it was like so up my alley that it had my exact location.
How did you decide which terms to include? Because as sort of like the ex-kid comic of like, experts in any subject will over-assume the amount of knowledge like the common people have. I was thinking there's not that many specific birding terms. And I was like, wait, there are a lot of specific birding terms. So how did you decide which ones to put in the book? And then what is the final number of all the different terms in the book? How many definitions are there?
Oh, no, I don't actually know because we kept adding and removing them. Shoot, I used to know. I don't remember now. We definitely added a few near the end, and I just kind of came up with them off the cuff, and I really hope they're funny. There's
Great.
A lot. There's way more than I included, though. There's birding, and pretty much any natural science, as I'm sure you know, is absolutely full of its own terminology. And it's interesting. I mean, ornithology, botany, all these, sciences have their own terminology, but then birding also has its own, hobby terminology. So there are a lot of words. When I first got the assignment, I thought, okay, wait, before I say yes, I should make sure that there are enough terms. And then I started making a list and I had like 150 in like 5 minutes. And I was like, okay, I'm good. I'll be fine. But the ones I kept, it was actually a really tricky choice. So this is not an exhaustive book. There are a bunch of terms. They're not in there. There's some that I realized. There's actually one I realized last week that I should have included, which is a one-day wonder, which is a term for a bird that's only there for one day and then takes off. And I honestly completely left that one out. But I was trying to balance terms that are really specific with terms that are broader and there's just a general silly joke for them, because I wanted this book to be accessible to people who aren't deep birding nerds. And then there were some terms that I kept in and left out just because maybe they're a little bit offensive, or honestly, some of them I could not come up with a joke for. But all that said, I think that anyone who's a birder or even just getting into it is going to learn a lot of terms from this book, even if it's not exhaustive. There's a lot in there.
Do you have a favorite definition?
Yeah, I do. So there's one for first of year, which is FOY. People get really excited when they get their first of year bird, the first time in a year that you see a certain species. And then I don't know what was up with me, but I made this giant list of, I explained what first of year was, and then I made a giant list of fake definitions. So for example, there's FOMO, which is fear of missing Orioles. And there was FPS, which is finches per season. And then I ended it with, the thing about writing a humor book that I learned in this process is you write a book and then you think, haha, I'm so funny. And then you edit it for months and months. And by the end of that, you're like, I am the least funny person in the world. So this was a joke where now I read it and I go, oh, okay, I think that's still funny. So it was the last term in the list was FOIA, which stood for Freedom of Information and Hinga, which is that doesn't make any sense. And then Hinga is a kind of bird, doesn't make any sense. And I just am continually amused that I made that nonsense term and that it's published in an actual book.
Oh, that's excellent. A lot of the time with Wild Green memes, when I have to make something for the newsletter or whatever, and I can't think of a joke, I just go with whatever the most chaotic thought I can have is, and then it works. Like, that's usually actually pretty funny.
Like, sometimes in trying to make a joke, there's a tendency to overthink it and think like, no, it's gotta be bigger. But sometimes like taking it all the way back to the beginning and just be like, this is like very low effort or like silly, like that's the best one to go with, because especially if like everyone is also, it also subverts the expectation of like everything is really big, so that when it's like simple and really silly, it's like perfect.
Yeah, y'all are really like the paragons of this kind of thing, and it gives me confidence to just throw out some of the jokes and then later go, those are funny. Although there were a few, and they don't come to mind immediately, probably because I've deleted them from my memory as hard as I could. But there were a couple jokes where quote unquote jokes where I sent them to my editor, and he just wrote back and was like, there's no joke here. And I was like, you are correct. There is no joke here.
Just get so into it and you're like, actually, here are some just like facts about birds, no jokes, this just straight up.
100%. I had one that was the definition for stringer, which is, it's kind of a complicated concept. It's this term in birding which refers to someone who says that they see birds that they don't see. But some people do it out of zero maliciousness. They just are either overly optimistic or, they're getting into birding and they'll report something really exciting when there isn't something there. And then some people will full on fabricate a sighting, including photoshopping and lying and just, all this complexity. And so I had this giant essay on stringers, and it was like 2 pages, and there was no joke. And and my editor was like, we have to cut this down. This is not your place to just go on a soapbox about stringers.
What I also love about the book is that there's lots of introducing terms that people probably haven't heard of before, like if you're not really birded, but introducing it in an accessible way, but mixed in with just like a definition of vulture, which is just like a bird that people see all the time, which I really like. Am I allowed to read this definition?
Please do, yeah.
Okay, the vulture definition is, it's a noun, a bird of prey that, out of politeness, waits for its prey to die of natural causes before eating it. Which was just so good. And you're like, I mean, like, I guess. It's a mix of, it's like the technical information in a funny way, but also like information that they already have, but also in a funny way. And so I think it's going to help people think, oh no, this whole book is just full of things I don't know. It's like, oh, I do know some of these. So like, I'm actually more of a birder than I thought. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, that was my goal. I have this sort of secret goal, which is to convince people who are reading it. So there's kind of 2 ways you can go with one of these. You can make one so esoteric that you can make people feel bad for not understanding some of the jokes. But I really wanted to bring people in and go in this tiny soapbox of everybody's a birder. So I had one definition for Canadian goose. Of course, it's Canada goose. It's not Canadian goose, but a lot of beginner birders will say Canadian. But then I had this whole rant about like, if you're the kind of person who's inclined to correct people. Ask yourself about your motivations, and also, are you currently being distracted by the fact that like a Canada goose is approaching you, and are you being bitten repeatedly by a goose? And like, so I was trying to be silly, but I really wanted to make people feel like they were good bird. There's birding is so funny because I've never met more people who are actively in a hobby who are like, oh, but I'm not really a birder. Like, I'm not really good enough. I feel like, if you're a stamp collector, you're not like, well, I know I have 1,000 stamps, but I'm not really a stamp collector. I feel like birders will have binoculars and they'll go out all the time and they'll constantly look at birds and they're like, but I'm not a birder. So you are, I promise you are.
My hobby is imposter syndrome.
Isn't that all of our hobbies?
Yeah.
Yep. 100%. Yeah.
I love that you had definitions for herpers and butterfly people in as well. And it was just a birder that looks for herps, a birder that looks for butterflies.
Yeah, I am both of those things, 100%. Herper is one of those terms that is a fun one because people have no idea what you're talking about, and also the whole concept of a herp, or herpetofauna is taxonomically invalid. So it's like just a funny thing where you're like, I'm going herping, and my friends are like, what are you talking about? And then I say, oh, and I'm specifically going road cruising, which is like when you go out at night and you drive up and down a road or around sunset and you look for snakes that are out on the road. And that just sounds really questionable.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell people I'm going on a 6-hour road trip that has a snake at the end of it.
Oh, I want to go on
like
one of
that.
those. I like that. Hopefully it has a snake because it doesn't always, you drive all that way and then sometimes there isn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just has whatever fast food place is still open at the end of it.
For the herper one, if you encounter a person who's lifting up rocks or log and peering under them, they're either a herper or a really ineffective birder.
Yes. Okay. So there are some ground nesting like petrels that you might find under there, but you're probably not gonna. Yeah.
Especially lifting up rocks and logs. If a bird got under there, impressive.
True. Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Which maybe there's species unknown to science because birders haven't been picking up rocks and logs enough. And there's birds underneath them that we just don't know about yet.
Whoa. Or maybe there's maybe the center of the earth is full of birds. So you could go full conspiracy theory.
This is like legitimate questions from 1830.
Yeah.
The moon is covered in birds.
The birds actually push the moon across the sky, but you never see them because they're always behind the moon.
Oh, obviously. Yeah.
Obviously.
Now, is it many birds or one big bird? Because I think science still doesn't know.
Oh, good question. Yes.
I'm in the camp of many birds because then also like some of them can rest and some of them like it's a better division of labor rather than
labor laws. Yeah.
Exactly. Rather than putting like all of that expectation on just one individual. It's like we're all in this together kind of thing.
So far, this is the best interview ever done. I'm just going to say.
Perfect.
There was a listener question that kind of relates to what we were just talking about in a weird sideways way, which is, what is the moon in Bird and Moon comics? Like, where did that come from specifically?
That is
Conspiracy of birds pushing the moon across the sky.
clearly. We just answered it. No, that's a really good question. So I'm kind of old, and 20 years ago when I made my very first webcomic, it was called Bird and Moon. And so I'd been making comics for years and years and years, but 20 years ago, I was in college. I had kind of hit a breaking point where I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I took a year off. I worked for an amazing nonprofit up in Toronto called FLAP, which tries to stop birds from hitting human-built structures and windows and that kind of thing. And so I did that, and I made my first webcomic. And it was interesting because I took a year off and I kind of like set up the rest of my life. And then I had to go back and finish school, which I didn't want to do. But I made this comic called Bird and Moon, which is it's really different from what I do now. It was about a lonely city bird that meets the moon, and the moon turns out to be a bird, and they become friends and they fly around and they have this magical night. And then at the end, the moon has to fly back, and be in the sky. And it's this like emotional thing. And so I bought the domain Bird and Moon, and then I kept using it. And that was my brilliant marketing plan. And what I should have done is, rebranded at some point, but I just kept putting comics on the same website. And now people think there are two of us, and they'll say like, you guys are so whatever. And I'm like, oh, I wish there were two of me.
I'm a huge fan of Bird, but I don't know so much about Moon's work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to watch out for Moon. Yeah, Moon is a troublemaker.
And if there's two, back to the division of labor, one of you could rest while the other makes comics. Yeah.
Oh, I wish. I need to hire somebody. Bird seeks Moon. Yeah, that's a good question, though. It's totally just a brand issue. But, this was back in the day when there weren't a lot of us online, and I really should have bought something smarter. But luckily, I did later buy rosemarymosco.com because I'm the only one in the world. So it was cheap and easy to do.
I feel like Bird and Moon captures the vibe very well.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of internet cartoons and internet projects just wind up with a random weird name, especially because I was buying domains back when there were still some available, but now you've got just like the weirdest, random word and like words where they're not really words. And people will be like, try my new, shipping company, Schmlarts or something. And you're like somehow supposed to spell it because that domain was still available.
We have been fighting to get wildgreen.com for like years. It's a 1990s style toothpaste sales webpage run by some guy, I think, in Switzerland. So we have to go through like a translator and we have to do all this stuff. And every couple years we ask him, do you want to sell it now? We would love to buy it. And he's always like, not yet. So I guess we just haven't offered him enough. But this is an ongoing battle in the background of my life, is trying to get wildgreen.com's domain name.
What you need to do is buy wildgreentoothpaste.com and make it a website that's like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I bet that's still available. Although I don't know.
I bet it is. Toothpaste of all things. I don't know. It's just wild to me that it's toothpaste. Like, it's such a strange and specific thing for it to be sold.
Well, buy that website and then call it like the number 2 Swedish toothpaste company or something. And badmouth the other one. And then,
right, exactly. Just make a billboard for their company. Be like, don't you want this one?
Business tips. I have so many.
Completely unrelated. What is the Patagonia picnic table effect?
Oh, yeah. Patagonia picnic table effect. This was one that I honestly didn't know where Patagonia was. I had used the term, but I hadn't researched it before. So the term Patagonia picnic table effect is an effect that occurs when someone sees a rare bird at a really random location. In this case, picnic table at I think a rest stop in Patagonia, Arizona. And then multiple people go to that spot and then more rarities are seen. And this happens a lot because a lot of rare birds will, and by rarities, I mean birds that are lost and they'll wander into a new and exciting location. And birders really love that. And this will happen a lot because if you get a lot of eyes on a little spot that nobody really notices, they'll see more things. And also sometimes birds that are blown off course will wind up in the same place because of winds and environment and whatever. There was a paper studying it that I think said that this is not a valid effect, that this does not exist. I don't know if it's valid or not, but it's a really fun term to use to describe a phenomenon that you'll often get. And I've totally had this experience where I'll go looking for one rare bird and another rare bird will be there. And, there's just more eyes and more birders on that.
Kind of like a birding version of the phrase, when it rains, it pours.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. And it's just one of those terms that I think that's more of like a deep birding term. Like you have to be a real bird nerd to understand that one. So that's one that I think is kind of fun to share. It's also not a catchy term. Like it takes a lot of syllables to say.
It's 4 words.
Yeah, Patagonia picnic table effect. I think for years I thought it was actually a picnic table in Patagonia, which has such beautiful environment that I was like, yes, that's got to be it. And
Makes sense, right?
Not that Arizona is also a birding hotspot, area, but
the fact that it's Patagonia, Arizona is such a funny juxtaposition too, because those are both such like global destination nature places, but like very different and very far away from each other. So it's a weird crossover, almost like the birds appearing there.
It feels like also like a marketing scheme by Arizona to be like, come visit Patagonia, Arizona. And like how a lot of like cities and stuff in like the Midwest have like European names or stuff. Like there's a Paris, Texas. They're
everywhere. There's
everywhere.
I'm from Ontario, Canada, and we have a not that small city called London. I mean, it's not huge, but when I say, "Oh, I'm going to London," people don't think I mean London, Ontario.
There's a Cairo in New York.
Just about every city in Georgia is named like that. There's a Cairo, Georgia. I literally think they must have done this on purpose in Georgia because there are so many cities named after somewhere in Europe. Like it's literally, it might be every city over a certain size there is named after like, I don't know, Athens or Valdosta, which turned out to be in Italy. And
It's heartbreaking because I read this paper about indigenous place names and how useful they are and how like colonial names will just be this random, Athens or whatever. And then the indigenous place name will be like place where if you stand in this particular spot at a certain time of year, you will be hit by trees that are being carried by a terrifying flood. Like really useful information.
Yeah.
And then we've got like, like Verona or like whatever.
The craziest, most meta version of that effect for me is the state of Wyoming. Do you know where the Wyoming tribe is from?
No.
Pennsylvania. It has no connection to the place where the state of Wyoming is now. It was just totally, apparently from what I read anyway, it was just someone thought it was a cool sounding name. So they named their state after it 2,000 miles away.
Well, I can one up you there because Canada, the legend is, I don't know how true this is, but the name of the country, Canada is an indigenous name, and that a bunch of colonists or explorers, white guys ran into some indigenous people and kind of waved their arms and were like, what is this land called? And the indigenous people were like, well, I don't know what you're talking about, but that town over there is called Canada. And they were like, Canada is the name of this new land. And
it's like if Australia was named Kangaroo.
Exactly. What's that animal over there? What are you pointing at, you bizarre men?
Who are you?
Huge PR boost for the small town of Canada to become the name of the entire country.
That's
exactly.
true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have a few definitions in the book that are kind of like that too. I'm obsessed with bird names and I wanted to throw in just a couple of my favorite facts. There's a really incredible book that came out a few years ago called the Bird Names book, and I cannot remember who it's by. I need to look it up, but it's absolutely amazing. It's etymologies of all different bird common names. And I included one for Pyrrhuloxia. I always say that bird name wrong, so apologies. And one for ptarmigan. And the ptarmigan one really got me because it is like a total disaster of a name. Really similarly, it was the word ptarmigan came from a word like tarmachan, which is like a Gaelic Scottish word for like the habitat that this bird was in. And ptarmigans are these kind of really cute, they're the awebo birds. They like became a big meme because they make an awebo sound, but they're like these little grouse birds. And then some English guy saw the word ptarmigan and went, oh, well, that sounds kind of Greek. So let's put a P on the front, a silent P. And so that's why that name has a silent P, was not because it's Greek or not for any good reason, literally just because an English guy did not know about a Scottish word.
Pretentious.
Hysterical.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's totally pretentious. And growing up, I was like, why is there a silent P? That's got to be pretentious. But no, clearly I just don't know enough. No, 100% it is.
You were right. You could sense
crazy.
it even from a young age.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I like the definition for ptarmigan in the book. There's a lot of P's in front of the
This
other.
book is so cheesy. I really hope
I
people
love
are
it.
ready
It's
for dad
amazing.
jokes.
It's amazing.
There's a lot of puns. There's a lot of troubling puns.
Is there a definition that you wanted to include but actually had to cut out for whatever reason?
No, I can't think of one because, like I said, like there were a couple that weren't funny and then I cut them out just because they weren't funny, but I can't for the life of me think of what they were because there were so many. The definition for pun, I didn't think they would let me keep it because it's so bad. I can read it because it's so many bird puns. So the definition is pun, noun, a joke whose humor relies on using a word that has multiple meanings or on a word that sounds like another word. Birders both love and hate puns. They can be funny, but also groan worthy. Okay, so buckle up. Wren considering whether to deploy a pun or not, it's spelled like the bird, take stork of the situation and consider owl the consequences. Is your contribution go on to contribute to the conversation? Will it turn out okay such that everyone will think you're funny from heron out, or will people think you're Oriole piece of work? I was really proud of that one. What Trogan to do if the experience leaves you bittern and full of egrets? You'll likely decide that there are better ways to spend all this time. My editor is very nice.
No egrets.
No regrets. That's right.
I'm hoping I'm the first person to ever make a Spindalis pun.
I think probably, right? Like, how many people could have tried?
So this was, I was trying to balance really esoteric with really goofy. I think I have a definition for egg that's like a sort of rock that often has a small bird in it or something like that. So some of them are non-factual.
Something else that we haven't talked about yet is the comics that go along with it. You're originally known for your web comics, and you bring that to the book as well. Right now I have it open to the definition of snood, and you have a diagram of a turkey. And the funniest thing to me about this doesn't really illustrate the comics thing I'm talking about very well, but the funniest thing to me about this is that it's just the actual names for the parts of the turkey, but they're like snood, waddle, and caruncles, which sound completely made up.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I don't have to stretch very far for a joke because birds are just hilarious. But yeah, there are a whole bunch of illustrations in it. They're all original. And I hope people like them. I really like making art, but I'm more trained as a writer than an illustrator. So I always get a little nervous when I have to. This is only the second book I've illustrated myself. So I know some of the art is like a little goofy, but I had a great time.
Goofy is what we're here for.
I feel like you can feel the fun and like the joy and whimsy in it. Like for the oyster catcher, the little comic underneath it is an oyster catcher, the bird, running after an oyster that has two little legs and as if it's running and says, "Get back here." And that's just such a funny little image. The bird has little like beads of sweat because it's running so fast. And I'm like, I love that.
There was an Alice in Wonderland. I think the Walrus and the Carpenter or something. They had the illustration was like little oysters that were running away, like with little legs. And I was like thinking about that. But yeah, I think that definition is something about the name oyster catcher makes generous assumptions about the running speed of an oyster, which I hadn't really thought about it. And then I was looking at the name and I was like, why is it called catcher? Like it should be like oyster slurper or like.
That's a great question. I've never even thought about that before. I'm just like, well, they eat oysters, but then why aren't they called oyster eaters?
Yeah, nobody's throwing them and having the oyster catcher leap up in the air in an impressive display. And then
speak for yourself. I've got hobbies.
I gotta try that.
Throwing a frisbee for your dog is out. Throwing an oyster for an oyster catcher is in. Make them really earn that name.
They've been waiting forever for this moment, much like barn owls before the invention of barns.
Bed bugs before the invention of beds. This is going to be huge for oyster catchers.
Wow, incredible, incredible.
You've got another little illustration under the definition of movie, but you have a picture of a TV set. On the TV, there's a bald eagle, and it has the caption, "Red-tailed hawk screeching."
Yep, yeah. I feel like more people know about that now, but being a bird watcher and watching any sort of film will make you lose your mind because they always use... So the famous one is they use a red-tailed hawk scream for bald eagles, but there's so many movies and books and games where there's a sound you're hearing, and it's just very, very distracting. I think, man, what was the latest Predator movie? It was really incredible. It was so, so good, but it started with a red-tailed hawk. They shoot a red-tailed hawk out of the sky, and it's holding a fish. And I was like, they don't catch fish, and it just like pulled me out of it. And then the rest of the movie was so good and it pulled me back in, but I had this moment of like, bird facts, I need to have true bird facts.
Now they need to make a prequel that's just following that red-tailed hawk and explaining why it had a fish at the beginning of their movie.
Yeah,
exactly. And it's flying along. It's like, man, the predators are showing up. Oh well, anyway, I'm like holding this fish.
Right. I mean, like, I guess if everything's going crazy, I might as well try fishing.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. Oh, now there's a backstory, and I feel better about it.
The backstory about the red-tailed hawk and why it caught the fish, and then you could do another backstory about the fish, and then it gets caught, and the fish is like, "You're a red-tailed hawk. You don't eat fish. Like, why am I like trying to bargain for its life?" And that could be like a whole series.
I feel like we've lost the Predator content though, because that's why people were watching the movie. We need to add the Predator
dynamics. It could be we're expanding to different audiences.
Right, that's true. Bird audiences.
These are horror movies for fish.
Oh man, I never thought about like ads for tuna are like horror movies for fish.
Oh, true. I hadn't thought about that either. Yeah. We were just talking about like to a fish, a diving bird is like a cosmic horror. Like imagine if something dove out of space and then just ate you.
There's a lot of like, it's interesting what we consider a predator and what we don't consider a predator, right? Because a kingfisher like is a vicious predator. An anhinga is a vicious predator. A whales kill, thousands in a gulp. Like they're,
Speaking of bird calls, do you have a favorite bird call or a favorite, bird fact that was in the book?
I have a favorite bird call. It's not in there. I had a section on bird calls and I and I drew a tricolored herring making a noise that I think was just a grunting noise. They are one of the most beautiful birds in North America, and they also make one of the worst sounds if you want to go hear it. It's incredible. But my favorite bird song of all time, I think, is the musician wren. There's this amazing wren species farther south that it makes this very musical call, but it's also really eerie because it's almost human music, but not quite, and it's in this sort of minor lilting sound. Very bizarre. So that's my favorite one. But I don't think I learned a ton making this book because I was mostly making sure that I had the definitions right and trying to include as much humor as possible and just secretly sneaking in every fact that I know. Although there's a definition of the word peep, which is a really small, like one of a group of small sandpipers. Mm-hmm. And for that, I was writing the definition and then I went, oh no, I don't actually know which sandpipers count as peeps. Like I had this moment of like, do you count Baird's and white-rumped? And then I reached out to a bunch of experts and everybody disagreed. And it was this really interesting little rabbit hole to go through. And what I learned was there is kind of a definition of peep, but you can make it whatever you want. So there was some like drilling down and specifying there.
I just had an idea for the next meme I'm going to post. It's a picture of the bird, like the real bird that is an example of a peep. And then it says, every Easter, thousands are eaten. Is it worth it?
Like you could Photoshop a bunch of them like into the little peep packaging.
Yep.
Yes! And then also the joke of like, well, my definition of peeps typically is like they're made of marshmallows. They have kind of like a colored sugar on top. They're very seasonal. You don't see them year round. We could explore
brilliant. If y'all ever have an idea and you want someone to draw it, let me know. So I follow a few meme pages, but I'm also always really nervous. I know I follow you folks. There's like a couple others that I follow, but I'm always a little nervous that I'm going to see something and then later draw it and not remember that I'd seen it before.
There have been a problem.
Yeah, there have been a couple comics that I've made where I was sure I stole them from somebody and I did a ton of research and I never found the thing. And usually when you have that idea, it's because it's such a good idea that someone must have done it before. And so those are the good ones, or the ones where you think someone else did it, but they didn't. But you also have to be really careful we all wind up accidentally ripping somebody off, but you have to be really careful too. So it can be, that must be challenging for y'all too. It's just really hard to not... Humor, where does humor come from? Nobody knows. So sometimes it just comes from a memory of another joke.
Especially with basically fair use using things other people have made so much, like basically all internet memes are. It's like an interesting kind of vibes decision, whether or not you're stealing or whether or not you're actually just using it in a new or funny, different way. It probably exists 100% within a gray area all the time, but definitely I'll be looking at something I'm making. I'll be like, that's too similar. Or I'll be like, okay, it's different enough now, just depending on what it is.
It's kind of like, when is a species a new species? Like, when is it different enough from something else to be called something new? And like, I remember like way back in whatever grade, we had to read a summer reading book in like high school, was How to Read Literature Like a Professor, which was, I was like, this is boring, and then it was interesting, and then I thought it was boring again. And I want to go back and reread it now as like not a jaded teenager. But one of the things that like I really remember is like, there's no such thing as an original story. Everything is like a copy of a copy of a copy. Like Lion King is Hamlet, which like is this, and like it's from the Bible or it's from like an ancient story. Like there's only so many like retellings. So in certain, like when you break jokes down and like the comedy down, like it all comes down to the same few things. And it's like, okay, so like when is it remixed enough to be different? And we're all relying on our memories, but then like when is it, I've made jokes where I'm like, I'm so funny to come up with this, and someone's like, oh, that's that other thing. I'm like, I just completely forgot where it came from. So it's an interesting, like, how to navigate when is something new and when is it.
It's so complicated. I had a funny experience a few months ago so there's this other cartoonist who makes this comic called False Knees, and he's way more well known than me. He's an absolute genius. We've done some events together. We've corresponded. He's like the nicest man you will ever meet. Like I idolize him. He's amazing. But he makes comics where birds talk, and so he's been making them for less long than I have been doing them, but I definitely am way less frequent in my output, especially for the years that I was in grad school. It just kind of tailed off making comics. So I had this idea, and then I thought, oh, shoot, is this too similar to something he would do? So I emailed him, and he was like, no, you're good. Like that, I haven't done that before. I was like, oh, have you done this before? He's like, no, no, no. So I drew it, and I put it up, and then a few people were like, oh, that's false knees. And then they were like, oh, no, it's not. It's someone else clearly like ripping off false knees. And I just had this existential crisis of like, I've been doing these for 2 decades and it's really not. And I even emailed him and was like, hey, and he was like, no, this isn't, similar at all. Like, you're totally good. And it was just this funny moment of like, you don't want to reply to every internet comment, but I sort of wanted to be like, no. And not only like, is it not ripped off from him, but I have massive respect for him and we're like buddies and, it's just
you're gonna drop a screenshot of the Gmail conversation where he's like, that's not mine. It doesn't look like my thing. You're good. Don't worry about it. It's like, look, guys, I checked. It's okay.
Yeah. And there can be more than one bird cartoon. I promise you.
I've heard this described by Paul McCartney talked about it. I don't remember which song it was. He talked about he had a song come to him in a dream and he woke up and he wrote it down. And unlike most dream creations, it was actually good. But he was so worried that he must have heard it somewhere to have dreamt it that he asked like every other musician he knew that was like all the current pop musicians then and everything, like, did you write this song? And they all said no, so he published it. Now I don't remember which song it is, but like it's it's one of the very famous Beatles songs that he just assumed was plagiarized when he wrote it.
Wow, maybe he was visited by a time traveler who knew the song already and
by old Paul McCartney. Stole it from himself in the future.
Yeah.
In Back to the Future, where he plays the guitar song, he's like, you guys aren't ready for that yet, but like you'll get it later.
Well, what I have to do is I grew up with this amazing series. Do you know little known and seldom seen Birds of North America?
I do. I was thinking about finding a way to work that into this interview.
Yes.
We bought that book when I was a kid thinking we were buying a field guide and then gradually realized that's not what it was.
So there are so few books like this. And also these days, people don't really know this series because it's kind of old at this point. I don't mean old in a derogatory sense, but it came out of, and I think a lot of them are out of print now. But the series was Little Known and Seldom Seen Birds of North America. They were by Ben, Catherine, and John Sill. And John Sill is an incredible watercolor artist who's still doing amazing work. And then there's another field guide to Little Known and Seldom Seen Birds of North America. And then they had a third one that was Beyond Bird Watching. I think that was a fake magazine, which was hysterical. And I grew up with these books. And I also had that experience of thinking it was a real field guide because it's so dry and then it's not at all. But it was just such exquisite illustrations. And I will go and reread those and go, now, I want to make sure that I'm not remembering a joke from when I was 6 and I'll go and reread them and just make sure. And they're brilliant. If nobody has those books, if anybody has not heard of them, try to track them down. They're absolutely incredible. They're still so funny.
Yeah.
So after listening to this episode, you need to buy the double feature of Rosemary's book and then the obscure seldom seen Birds of North America. Yeah. You got to get it as a twofer.
They're beautiful. And their magazine too is just incredible. It's like, it's got like fake classified ads and like how to identify the speed of a bird flying overhead by how elongated its poop spray is. Like, it's just incredible. It's incredible.
That's awesome.
How fast it's going if it's carrying a coconut versus when it's not.
So we actually had 3 listener questions. One of them got preempted because what's your favorite bird call just came up in conversation. The second one was what's the moon in Bird and Moons. These are all getting just guessed at in the conversation. The third one was not a question. Someone literally just posted a link to a YouTube video of cardinals singing.
Huh.
So it's interesting.
Okay.
I think it's because we posted one of your comics that had a cardinal in it, but they missed the question and they just posted cardinal songs. So
I think a cardinal posted that.
I think so too. I think if we translated it, it would have a very well thought through question for you in it, but instead we just get to listen to it sound like a space gun.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I love it. People do that. People will reply to my comics with just like a really nice photo they took of that kind of bird. And I'm like, hey, that's delightful. Thank you. That's the sweetest thing. Go for it.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
The book is The Birding Dictionary, a tongue-in-cheek guide for people who find themselves obsessed, against all logic and reason, with birds. You can find a link to buy it in the description of this episode. Rosemary Mosco, thanks for coming on the pod.
Thank you so much. I'm such a huge fan of y'all, and this was a total delight. So thank you.
Oh, we are such a huge fan of too. So glad that you could come on the pod and we could hear about your new book.
Yay! Thank you.
Until next time, I'm Rhett.
I'm Io.
And I'm Rosemary.
And happy Year of the Frog.